non-episcopal form of Presbyterian Church, plus hardline Calvinist doctrine enforced by strict discipline, had been in existence in Scotland from the time of John Knox until pro-episcopal innovations under James VI and I, which Charles had sought to build on for an Anglicised church. As seen by its defenders, it was the original form of Christian church in the apostolic age, before bishops with their discipline and Romish ceremonial had emerged. Restoring this was a godly duty in England as in Scotland. The survival of most of the administrative forms and some of the ceremonial practices of the Catholic Church in the post-1559 Elizabethan Church in England thus had to be ended to install a true, pure church. The revival of episcopal authority and Romish doctrine, exaggerated by its critics, by Charles Laud and the Scots bishops in the 1630s in Scotland, had been forcibly rejected by outright defiance and armed rebellion in Scotland in 1637–39, to which the king had sought to reply with invasion to face defeat and bankruptcy. Local pro-church Highland clansmen, many of them Catholic, had been defeated, and an invasion from Ireland promised by Strafford had failed to materialise, and in summer 1640, the new Calvinist Scots army, staffed by many veterans of the Continental 30 Years' War, led by their commander, Alexander Leslie, had invaded England and defeated the advance force of Charles' less experienced, badly led army at Newburn on the Tyne. Lackadaisical Charles, slow to collect the main army to march north using an outdated medieval mechanism of feudal summons, had still been en route to York. Facing a virtual strike by part of the English nobility, instead of them loyally assembling troops for him as required, Charles had had to agree to a truce with the Scots. This disaster in 1640 had forced him to call Parliament and agree to listen to his subjects' demands, and indeed the Calvinist faction of peers led by Warwick had seen the Presbyterian struggle in Scotland as their own, and egged on the rebels, which arguably amounted to treason, and was seen as such by the king. While he was marching north to York, they had held a mutinous rally in London, and been seen as threatening armed revolt. Around a third of the nobility failed to join the king at York as required. Defeated and virtually bankrupt, though a potential loan of money and troops from Spain could have averted this had the Catalan and Portuguese rebellions not occurred in 1640, Charles had to summon the Long Parliament and agree to the demolition of his administrative and financial powers, closure of his prerogative courts, reform of the church, removal of his most disliked ministers, arrest of Laud, and impeachment of Strafford, who had urged him to use Irish troops to put down sedition in Scotland and possibly in England too. Strafford's execution rather than banishment, the latter was more usual for an impeached minister, was, however, more controversial, and was forced in May 1641 on a reluctant king who was thereafter more alienated from his critics, among whom, until this point, he had been seen as willing to offer senior posts and partial control of policy to Warwick, Bedford, Essex, and even Pym. Arguably, he committed a major mistake in appointing a key Warwick ally, radical lawyer Oliver St. John, Oliver Cromwell's cousin, who had led the defence in the ship money case as Solicitor General early in 1641. St. John acted as an opposition prosecutor, leading the indictment of Strafford and implicitly threatening similar vengeance on other centralising royal ministers, for example, Secretary of State Windbank, who fled the country. This heightened threat of judicial proceedings weakened Charles by unnerving his supporters, though the opposition would have done their best to pursue it via Parliament's judicial role anyway. The possibilities of political compromise and the opposition working for the king would have averted war, and it has been argued that the sudden death of the moderate reformist leader Bedford, less intent on abolishing the bishops and opposed to killing Strafford, in May, prevented a settlement. This is unclear, as other senior peers such as Warwick, not to mention the rabidly anti-Arminian Pym, would still have been insisting on a Presbyterian form of church reform, which the king was to resist as late as 1648, and the Scots commissioners in London also urged this on the English, partly to protect their newly freed church from an English